Hello.
Jan, how are you?
How are you, John? It's Jan, by the way.
Oh, sorry, Jan. Jan.
No worries. Everybody makes that mistake. It's no problem. I'm used to it.
How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Where are you calling from today?
I am in Chicago, or rather the suburbs of Chicago, but close enough.
Right. And how's the summer winding down over there?
It's good, It's good. I've been doing a lot of gardening, so my
Nice.
garden's in full bloom, Got like everything's kind of like flourishing, which is pretty awesome. Got some fruit trees going on.
Nice, nice. How
So
long how long you been into gardening?
just this year, pretty much. Like I got this new house. We just moved out here, and with a big backyard. So, um, it was like horrible. It was just overgrown with weed trees and stuff like that. So we took everything out, and we just started from scratch. And I love to go deep on hobbies. So as soon as I started getting into that, I was just like, researching everything and like getting really into it. So I was gardening like 2 to 3 hours a day for like 3 months straight, like setting up this whole backyard. It was pretty intense.
Cool, man. Yeah, my mom used to be a huge gardener, and
Oh
I
yeah.
always used to, she'd spend the whole day in the spring and summer in the garden, and I'd always like I wouldn't be able to understand how,
Yeah.
why she would, and as I move through life, I'm starting to get kind of the meditative, long term, being able to cultivate something and watch it grow, and also getting your
Yeah.
hands dirty and being in nature sort of aspect of it. So
It's totally, yeah, yeah. Like it's like if I don't do workouts, sometimes I do, martial arts. If I don't do that, then I'll go out in the garden, like dig, It's a good workout and it's like very zen.
yeah,
So
yeah, I
I
think
like it.
I think once I'll settle down, I'll get into it too. What kind of martial arts are you into?
I'm doing some kung fu right now. I've been doing a lot of martial arts throughout my life, the different kind of stuff. But recently, I just got into kung fu because I was looking for a morning class, and that was just kind of the thing that I could find, in the area.
Cool. And
Yeah.
like, what's kung fu like? Is it a good workout, or is it mostly kind of
Uh,
technical, or what?
it's a lot of everything. I mean, the class that I take, it's a little bit of a weird. It's called Freddy's Modern Kung Fu. So it's modern because it mixes like everything together. So we do like an hour of workout, just kind of typical boot camp type stuff, and then we do more like hand to hand drills, or we practice with one of those wooden dummies. If you've ever seen the Karate Kid
Yeah,
or any of
yeah.
those movies. So we do that kind of stuff, and we mess with weapons. We have like bow staff and sai and like things nunchuck sometimes.
Cool, man.
So different things like that. It's fun.
Yeah, I lived in China for several years, and the kung fu stuff seems to be relegated to the temples or monasteries or that kind of stuff. Like
Uh-huh.
it's really not a mainstream thing that like people do. If people want to be in shape or learn something, they'll go to the gym or they'll Muay
Yeah,
Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and stuff like that is becoming popular there.
interesting.
But kung fu seems to be kind of relegated to elsewhere.
Yeah, I could see that. It's not super like popular here either, I think.
Yeah.
Like I haven't seen a lot of classes outside of this one and maybe a few others, but
Cool, man. Well, look, let's get started because we don't have
yeah,
a tremendous amount of time.
all
But
good.
again, thanks for joining me. And I actually, so I downloaded Inventing, or sorry, I bought Inventing Bitcoin. I got the Kindle.
It's okay if you downloaded
No,
it
but
too.
I mean, I downloaded it to Kindle. I bought it and
Yeah,
downloaded it to
yeah,
my
yeah.
Kindle
I got you. I got you.
um, a few weeks ago and got halfway through it and then got busy with other stuff. And I just finished it tonight, so it's
Oh,
fresh.
nice.
It's fresh in my mind. First of all, congratulations on that because I think you did
Thank you.
a really good job in taking, what we all kind of, it's a big complex topic and we all wrestle with the how to explain it to our uncle, mom, cousin, whomever when we're given the
Hmm.
opportunity to do so. And I feel like we all probably feel like we always come up short just because it's hard.
Yeah,
It's one of those things you either see or you don't see. There's not a lot of in between. And so
it is tough. Yeah.
having taken a topic like that and really putting it in a format that I think will be digestible at least to a bigger audience
Hmm.
than the strictly technical ways that have come at this thing before. I think was very well done, and also kind of reverse engineering it and say, well, this is like the kind of money we want. How do we get there? And then using the various means in which you did to explain each part of it in very very accessible terms. So
Yeah, I
congratulations on
appreciate
that.
that. Thank you. It is a tough job, and I still feel like I'm working on my elevator pitch, and that's why I mean the book is short, but it's still not as short as it needs to be. I think for most people to really get into it, you need to give them like that 1 minute, here's why it matters and here's how it works thing. And it's tough with Bitcoin. There's just so many angles to it, right?
It's so hard, man. What I mean, and because you, it's hard just to get the basic level, but we both know how deep the rabbit hole goes, and so how far do you try to get somebody on that elevator pitch? What's your current elevator pitch?
Well, I basically start off with saying that it's a new type of money, and I think that's a good segue because it helps people understand, ask some questions like, why is it different from the money that I know, my day-to-day money, my fiat money, right?
Yeah.
Because I think most people don't even understand anything about how money works.
Hmm.
I certainly didn't really think about money before I got into Bitcoin. So I think starting off with that, it's a new type of money, and then once you say that, and then it's like, well, why is it different? Well, it's digital, just like your dollars, but nobody's in charge of them, right? Nobody can issue more of them. Nobody can control how you spend them. So it's a freedom money. That's my pitch right now. It's a freedom money. It's a money that you can spend freely, that you can take with you if you're leaving your country, if your country's in trouble, especially. That's kind of my angle for it because I do come from the former Soviet Union. So I've sort of lived through a country that was going through a phase where Bitcoin could have really helped. So, I wish Bitcoin existed 25 years ago, 35 years ago, 40 years ago. It could have prevented a lot of bad stuff, but it exists today, right? So our job is to educate people on why it might be important for them in the future.
Yeah, it's funny. I use the term freedom money as well because I just think it's so apt when describing Bitcoin. But I think in general, we learn best when we're incentivized to do so, right? And currently, the two
Hmm.
incentives are either making money on speculation, or you're incentivized because you need it to get money out of a country, take money with you, as you said, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
I would imagine, although I don't have much firsthand information on this, that in places like Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey, and other places that have experienced currency crises or things of that nature, that incentive is probably enough at least to get more and more people learning and asking questions and trying to figure out how to use this thing, right? And
Yeah, I think we've seen some of that. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the article by Matt Alborg from last year that was about how Bitcoin is working as Satoshi intended, and he looked at local Bitcoin's analysis and seeing how it's risen in countries that actually have had these problems.
right.
And interestingly enough, we see this, like we see Venezuela going through this crisis, and then you see every country surrounding Venezuela, their volumes going up, right? They're looking at Venezuela and saying, oh, I see. That's what happens. Like that could happen here. We better get our stuff, our act together and start buying some Bitcoin.
Right. And I wonder what the effect of that will be. I mean, playing this thing out, several decades perhaps. But if it is the case that aside from the speculators in the Western world, let's say the mainstream population, will, the emerging markets, the countries that are having these issues now and slowly move into something like Bitcoin, what will the dynamic be if in 20 years time, they've slowly but surely been moving in, and the more developed markets, when they have their
Mm.
crises, their currency crises, will be at a disadvantage as a result of having been kind of late to the party.
Yeah, I think that that could happen. I still think that, I mean, realistically speaking, just with the amount of education and wealth that's in the more developed nations, they're the ones really buying up the majority of the Bitcoin right now.
Right.
So whereas it may not be well distributed, it's probably like being held by a small number of people with relatively of good means with money to spare. That's kind of where who the Bitcoin holders are right now. But that's not to say that that's not going to change in the future as some of these people exit the markets to kind of capitalize on their gains. Like you said, a lot of people in America or in Western countries, they're just speculating. They're looking to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how the thing gets bootstrapped, right? By us speculating, we're giving it a certain value that then these other more struggling nations are able to bootstrap off of, right? And get people over there some kind of jumping board to get out of their bad situation. So I think it's a nice balancing situation where the richer countries are helping the poorer countries, kind of like inadvertently by just being selfish and trying to speculate on this
Right.
asset.
Yeah, I agree. And I've never had an issue with speculation either. Not, because for one, sure, if you want to speculate on something and try to make money, fine. But two, the act of speculating is kind of like you're putting skin in the game to prove a certain narrative, right? And Bitcoin has
Mhm.
so many fascinating and intertwined narratives associated with it. And from the very beginning, when people started exchanging Bitcoin for cents and then dollars and then tens of dollars and so on, they're
And then
basically
pizzas.
right. They're basically saying, I think this thing is X and X has a value of Y, and that
Right.
process keeps going back and forth over time to where we are now, where we say, I think Bitcoin is sound money, programmable money, and all the other things that we think it may become in the future. And I think that has a future value of whatever, and I'm willing to speculate on that now, therefore, the existing price.
Yeah, and I think Trace Mayer made this pretty apt statement that the speculation is that first network effect. It creates this influx of capital into the system, which then funds development of the ecosystem and the build out of the infrastructure that we need to actually make it into what it needs to be for worldwide adoption.
Yeah.
Because I think we can all agree that we're still very early in this sort of it's a global shift, right? It's a shift in how we think about money. It's a shift in culture. It's a technological shift, and there's so much that needs to happen that without the speculation, there would be no money to fund that
Yeah.
revolution. And so the speculation is the funding for the revolution, and it's just like it's a flywheel, right? The more money we add into the system, the faster the system spins, and it just starts to gain all this traction. It's really awesome to see that happening in real time.
Yeah, and I guess that is partially that's you know that's partially why Bitcoin has grown in the way that it's grown, right? It kind of accumulates all this momentum and activity and speculation and and development, and then it kind of has this blow off top, and then it
Hmm.
comes down, and then it continues its onward march. But
Yeah.
you mentioned that we're early, and of course, objectively, I think everybody would agree. But when you're so involved in the space, because there's so much to know and learn and stay up to date on your knowledge and information of this stuff, sometimes it's easy to forget how early it is because you look back on the last 10
Hmm.
years and you say, wow, look how much has happened, not only with the price, but everything in the space. And then you come up to now and you think there's so much going on. There's, like I said, it's hard to keep up on it sometimes. But,
Yeah.
you know,
That it is.
but then you got to remember, like, no, this thing will be orders of magnitude bigger and more complex and whatever in another 10 years, for example. And right
Right.
now will seem like ground floor, we'll see rudimentary and, it's
Yeah, I
just,
mean, a lot of stuff right now, it's you can get mired in details a lot, right? Like the working of Bitcoin, how the Lightning Network works. Like there's so much going on there, all the businesses that are being built, the lending businesses, the storage businesses, the multi-sig stuff. There's so much going on. But we also have to remember that as well as with the internet, early internet was like really, really hard to use, like email was really hard to use. You had to like SSH into a server and like use a command line terminal. It was horrible. And so people who studied the internet in the early days were like mired in details, but now we have really high level abstractions to this stuff, right? So the everyday person, when they use email, they're not really thinking about how email works. They just log into their Gmail and they use it. So we're a long way from that, I think, in the Bitcoin world. We're a long way from really high levels of abstraction. And
yeah,
so it feels like just keeping up with everything that's going on is crazy. But we have to remember also that for the everyday person, none of this stuff's going to really matter as much, right? Like a lot of
right.
it's going to get abstracted away over time. And we may not even understand what the correct abstractions are yet. It's just very early from that sense because we're still trying to understand where the technology meets the user experience. There's still quite a gap there.
Yeah, that actually made me think the other day, as someone who has these conversations in this space and is hoping at least partially to appeal to people that are trying to learn more, coming from the mainstream, I guess. I was
Mm.
wondering, as with the internet, like what will be kind of the limit that people accept for their knowledge of this new thing, right? So, as you said, most people have no idea how the internet works, but they know that it's a method of transferring information and media and things of that nature, and that's basically it. And they know it connects
Right.
all the apps and they're all that kind of stuff. And so I wonder, kind of, will programmable sound money like be the narrative that really sticks and people get, and beyond that, I don't want to know? Will it be something
Yeah,
like that?
it might be. What's interesting is I was recently explaining the internet to my daughter, who's 5 years old. So it's way too early for her to really understand. But when she was asking me like, what is Siri, what is Alexa? I was kind of giving her a quiz, like, do you think it's a person? Like, where do you think Siri lives? And she was not sure. And so I started saying, okay, look, all these movies and all this music and everything we get that lives on another different place called the internet, and that's a whole bunch of computers, right? But the thing is, where the angle that I took was really talking about like this is how we get our music and movies. Okay, if you asked me to explain the internet, say even 15 years ago, that would not be the angle I would take because that was not where we would get our music and movies, right? And so the normalization of the internet in our lives, right? Like we get our music and we get all of our content from the internet now, right? That was not the case 15, 20 years ago. I think it's going to be the same thing with Bitcoin, where once it becomes our normal everyday money, the questions are not going to be like, what is Bitcoin? It's just going to be like, well, how does money work? And most people, again, today don't understand or need to understand that. When they wave their Apple Watch in front of a Apple Pay terminal and like magic happens, nobody understands what happens back there. They just know that like their bank account at some point will get debited and everything will be fine, right?
Right.
And so I think we're still a long way from that. But if you think about the kids that are being born into the Bitcoin generation, the kids that have been born in the last 10 years and that are being born now, where Bitcoin is normal. And maybe it'll be longer than that. Maybe it'll be more than a generation. But those kids that grow up with Bitcoin will just think of it as money, right? They'll wave some magic thing, their phone or whatever implant they have in their head at that point, and that will do the transaction, right? And a lot of it will be abstracted away. So I don't know if those conversations will be the same, even 5 or 10 or 20 years from now as they are today.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. But as let me ask you this: as an educator, you wrote the book on Bitcoin, as it were, inventing Bitcoin, and we will break in the kind of motivations and stuff in a sec. But as an educator, how do you determine the sweet spot? We were just kind of discussing like how much do people really need to understand this to value it and to use it. And
Yeah.
if the corollary is the internet, then not very much. So what is the role of education in this space? I mean, it's relevant for both of us, but what should we be striving for in terms of fostering adoption, if at all?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Well, I think that there is a an element of education that's required for our generation, right? Because for us, Bitcoin is not normal. We saw Bitcoin come into existence, and at first it was this very strange thing. We didn't understand what it was, and we sort of saw it morph and evolve over time, and start to gain different understanding of it over time. And like you said, the narrative around Bitcoin has shifted as we understand it more and more, as we understand the economics of it and the technology. So I do think there's a room for education, but there's different levels of abstraction, right? So, for example, my book, it's a 2-hour read. It's not super long, but it does get into a relatively technical um, realm with explaining the nuts and bolts of how Bitcoin works. The reason I go there is because I think for the current generation, for us, it's really important to understand what it is we're dealing with because we require extra convincing. Like people that are, say, 30 years old or 40 years old, they require a little bit of like a push, and the push should be why does Bitcoin need to exist? And that's something I start with, and I talk about what Satoshi wrote, what his motivations were, some of the problems with our current banking system, our current financial system, and our money, the very base of it all, why he was motivated to create Bitcoin. I think that's important, and then understanding why the claims that Bitcoin makes are credible. Like, why are there really 21 million Bitcoins and not anymore? Why can't anybody just go and change the rules? Why do we say that it's seizure proof or seizure resistant or censorship resistant? Why do we say these things? And to answer that question, I think we need to look at the technology. So that's why that's what I focused on in this book, and it's really targeted for people in this current sort of generation watching Bitcoin happen. I don't think this is the same book that I would have written if it was 25 years later, because at
Right.
that point, like it's us sort of raising our kids on a new system and helping them understand it from a different perspective. And it's very different when you grow up in something rather than see it come into being in front of your eyes. I think it's a very different kind of educational process.
For sure. Were there as a result of that, were there certain elements or attributes of Bitcoin that you left out intentionally or didn't, in finding that sweet spot? Obviously, you went a bit further because it's this generation, but are there things that you didn't want to touch because you just didn't feel
Yeah,
they're
I mean,
relevant?
I barely touched on the cryptography of it. Frankly, the cryptography aspects are probably the most difficult to understand, and also less relevant because they're not really even Bitcoin specific. A lot of the cryptography in Bitcoin isn't specific to Bitcoin. It's specific to like everything that happens on the internet uses some type of digital signature scheme at this point. So And like I said, normal day people, like when you go to the website, you're not thinking about digital signatures or how SSL works. You're not thinking about how any of that stuff works. It just happens. So I didn't touch on the cryptography too much. I just kind of said it's secured by cryptography. Here's the idea. It's secured by this sort of statistical process, but we didn't really talk about that in depth.
Right.
I think that's one thing that really most people don't need to know about.
Yeah. And how's the reception been? It was published when?
So I should probably know this. I don't know. I think it's been about 6 months. So I originally published it. I published the Kindle version about a year ago. It was kind of my soft launch prototype, and then I worked on it more and more as I got more feedback, and almost entirely rewrote it. I'd say I rewrote at least one third to one half of it, and then published it again. I think it was early June. I want to say because it's around the time of Bitcoin 2019 when it was actually launched.
Right. And how's it
And so
been,
yeah,
how's it been going?
the reception's been really good in the Bitcoin community. I'm very flattered and thankful for everybody who's come around and retweeted my book. I have some real hardcore like people who just love to shill my book. Like I just see them on Twitter constantly shilling my book, which is really amazing. It means that it really struck a chord with them, right? It's not just a book for them. For them, it's like a way to get new people into Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and that's ultimately what was for me the motivation was I wanted to have something that I could give people and say, look, I know Bitcoin's a lot, but here's something that's relatively short. If you commit just a few hours of your life to this, I promise at the very least you'll come away with an understanding of what Bitcoin is. And then at that point, you can make a decision on whether it is something that you want to put your money into or not. I really stay away from like investment advice. If you look at the book, there's nothing about how to buy Bitcoin, how to even use a wallet. I don't talk about the nuts and bolts. That's like a do your own research thing.
Yeah.
And there will be ways to address that later. But the book is about like understand the concepts first. If you understand the concepts, you're going to make an informed decision.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, man, because apart from needing to exorcise my own obsession with Bitcoin in launching this podcast and just having these conversations and asking questions and all that kind of stuff, the secondary reason was just like you, having all these conversations with people, and either they're really kind of an uphill battle in terms of getting people to appreciate the innovation, the necessity, the monetary components, all of that kind of stuff, or it devolves into kind of an argument where it's not based on logic, it's just kind of emotional rejection outright. And
Yeah.
so part of the motivation for doing this was just like when those conversations happen now, I can say, I do a podcast. If you're interested in checking it out, here's a few episodes that you might be interested in or whatever. But I do it partially so I can defer, so I don't have to have as many of those conversations. That I can just say, yeah, check out the podcast. I talk more
Yeah,
about it there.
I think when you talk about Bitcoin with somebody, you get a real visceral reaction from their brain, and it's either like, this is really cool, I want to learn more, or it's like, oh my God, this is like really going against everything I believe in. Like this is, dark criminal money. Like,
Right.
what are we gonna do? And is a lawless world we're gonna live in when nobody can control money? Like, so you get that kind of emotional reaction. And so when you're having the conversations face to face, even with my friends, I've had this. Like some friends have gotten really antagonistic, and not
Me
because
too.
they don't like Bitcoin. They're like, well, but what about this? But what about that? And it's like, okay, well, maybe just take some time to read about it on your own time and digest it, because it's a different kind of learning experience when you digest by yourself versus when you're in a sort of heated debate, like fight or flight mode with somebody, right?
Yeah, that's exactly my point. I've had those conversations, and there's no point in having them because they're not open to asking you a question whereby they want to receive an answer that will inform them further. It's just a kind of, like you said, it's kind of an antagonistic argument. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, the funny thing is, I think I have not found anybody who's deeply researched Bitcoin and come away like anti-Bitcoin, except for
right,
like there's
right,
a couple like Twitter personalities who have more or less made a career out of being no coiners.
right.
But that's like I feel like that's a marketing thing. Like they're really just that's how they make money. That's cool, but it's really hard I think for a normal person to like really understand Bitcoin and then say no, this is stupid.
Right.
Like it's
The one that
there's
get
a lot there.
the one that gets me, you've got your Peter Schiffs and Rubinis of the world and people like
Right.
that, where I just feel they haven't sat down and investigated it. I just think they were against it from the beginning. They have like a basic understanding, and
Right.
their biases and a lack of a fuller understanding has led to them having that opinion. What really kind of uh, what I can't wrap my head around is the non-scam altcoin people. So the people who are trying to be altruistic, if there is such a thing, and who seemingly are interested in the tech and interested enough to try to understand it, but go down a completely different path. Those ones I have a harder time relating to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I'm surrounded by a lot of these people. As in Chicago, there's a very strong blockchain community, quote unquote, rather than a Bitcoin community. And my very like how I got into Bitcoin, well, it was through a very crooked path. Originally, I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, and I actually hadn't bought some at the top of the $30 bubble.
How'd you hear
Without
about it?
I heard about it on a Slashdot. Actually, I read about it in Slashdot, didn't understand what it was, didn't really have time to research it. And then I bought some because I figured, what the hell, I don't know what this is, but people seem to be talking about it. Uh, and then like basically watched it go from $30 to $2 and forgot about it and decided that it wasn't worth my time. But it took me like a few cycles. So it was 2011, then 2013 I heard about it again bought some at the top of the $1,000 bubble. Again, watched it go down to like 200, 300, and again decided like I don't know what this is, and I don't know why I keep buying it at the top of these bubbles. This seems horrible. I'm just punishing myself. So it wasn't really until 2016 until I actually started understanding Bitcoin. But Ethereum was really like on the scene at the time, right? And I started actually investigating Ethereum first because that was the thing that I'd heard about the most. And coming from a technical sort of developer background, I looked at Ethereum and I looked at all the projects going on, and it's like it's very Silicon Valley startup world out there, and there's a lot of people trying to do stuff, right? I would argue that a lot of them are not scams outright, like in any sense that where they're trying to do something malicious. They're like trying to build some kind of new technology. The thing for me was after I started learning about Bitcoin, I delved more into the economics of it and starting to understand it more as a money. You start to see a problem with the idea that these other projects are like trying to do a system that is also simultaneously a monetary system
Right.
because they're essentially competing on the monetary front with Bitcoin, and there's no harder money than Bitcoin. And once you start to understand that the hardness of that money and the liquidity of that money starts to suck in all the value, then you have a problem because every other thing that's trying to create a token where that token will be effectively a type of money, that doesn't really work in this world where you have open competition between monies, and then there's Bitcoin sucking all the air out of the room. So yeah, I mean, like in Chicago, like I said, there's this Voice of Blockchain conference. I actually helped fund it because I'm trying to like bring the Bitcoin aspect back into it. So I'm doing a talk this year, and it's going to be
Nice.
a keynote on the state of Bitcoin, right? And there's going to be a bunch of like corporate types in the room that are going to be talking about supply chain or health on the blockchain or something like that. And I'm going to say, look, guys, that's all well and good, but it's not really what's happening here. What's happening here is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And all this stuff just got like mixed in with Bitcoin somehow, and I'm not sure how it's even relevant. It's like corporate databases on one side and then like sound money on the other side. It's just like two different worlds, and they got conflated for no real reason other than the technology appears similar.
Yeah. Other than they both have a token to represent
Right.
something, you know?
And a lot of them, like in the corporate world, they don't even have tokens really, because like a lot of these guys are trying to make like some shared database between five companies. There's no need for a token. It's just like a shared, ledger. Cool, like whatever. If that works for you, fine.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with Bitcoin or crypto really per se. So I'm not really sure what why those people are at the same types of conferences the Bitcoiners are, and so it's really strange for me. And but I do think there's a lot of people that are sort of in the altcoin world where they are trying to compete for money, um, and that those people perhaps, in my opinion, have not really understood the economics of how money works,
Right.
and they're
Right.
still looking at it as technology. And if you look at it as technology, there's room for competition until the cows come home.
Yeah.
Um, but if you really understand that what we're competing on is the hardness and the soundness of that money, then anything that's not as decentralized as Bitcoin is a failure right out the gate, and that's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's what the quote unquote maximalists, get them so not wound up because the maximists are chill because they know they're on the right side of things. But you know, all these other projects and coins, whether it's faster transactions or cheaper transactions or all this kind of stuff, the key piece that's missing out of that, promotion for those things is, yeah, but what is it you're exchanging? What is it you're
Hmm.
transacting? Because as long as Bitcoin's around, it's not money, right? So
Right.
if great, you can send something of no or temporary, let's say, market value from one place to another really, really fast for, really inexpensively. Great. Who's going to want to do
Right.
that though if it's not money?
Right, exactly. And the thing is that we already have really fast ways of sending money-like things around. They're called, PayPal and Chase Quick Pay. Now, they don't serve all of the world, so there's some elements of like we need to serve the rest of the world here. But like you said, if the thing we're sending has very temporary value and it's fluctuating like crazy because all it is some, some low value thing that's being pumped and dumped all the time, that's not like a good basis for sound money. And then if the thing itself is under centralized control, then you're back to square one with that
Right.
fiat, right? It's like you're just sending out a token that essentially somebody has full control over.
Yeah.
And so why aren't you using PayPal? Because that works really well. And at the end of the day, the only way you're going to get the fastest system you can possibly build is one that's running in one data center on computers that you own a whole entirely, right? That's going to be the fastest system. As soon as you start to distribute it, this is like something that anybody who's ever built a distributed system can tell you is that systems get slower as you move them further apart. It's kind of intuitive, right? So if you're trying to make something fast, then you're going to be pushed towards centralization. And if you're trying to create something decentralized, then it's going to have to be slow. There's not really some kind of magic that makes the decentralized thing really, really fast.
Yeah.
So all this stuff that we hear about a hash graph or something with 100,000 transactions per second, it's like, well, how are you doing that exactly? Because if it's going to be between the U.S. and China, and you're actually going to have a permissionless system where anybody can join, that is not going to be the throughput. Sorry.
Yeah. And you mentioned something a lot, relevant to this. And I'm not sure if I heard it in an interview you did or if it was in the book, but you said that proof of work is proof of stake. It's just staking something that's hard to obtain,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
And
for
that's
sure.
that's something that I think a lot of people that are proselytizing for these other, systems are kind of missing somehow. That you are
Yeah.
staking something. You're just staking energy.
Yes, energy and the hardware, right?
Right,
And
right.
importantly, like the hardware itself is also pretty hard to produce. And I mean, that might change over time. Who knows? Like with advances in 3D printing technology and like if you imagine like everybody's home has an ASIC manufacturing plant built in, and they just press a button, they get a little ASIC out of it, and it's like this big. I mean, that could happen, but I think that in reality, there's a certain like economies of scale thing that happens with hardware manufacturing. Same thing with energy, right? You're gonna have. I actually see the mining of Bitcoin becoming pretty centralized in the sense that you're gonna have centralized within each mining facility, right? So each mining facility to be the most possibly efficient would have to have its own ASIC manufacturing and its own power production. Like if you really take things out to the maximal, like where do they logically lead, right?
Yeah.
You have to have the lowest cost of manufacturing the hardware and the lowest cost of energy. So that means we're probably going to end up with some set of geo-distributed, relatively large mining facilities that actually do all of the above together as technology improves. They're their own energy producers. They're their own hardware manufacturers, and that's how they compete. And like the competition might end up that there's only a few dozen of these, or maybe even less, because like how many major data centers are there in the world? And if you look at like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, and how many other data centers are of that scale? So there's a certain economy of scale thing that happens there.
Yeah. But basically, what you're saying is that mining is going to become so competitive. The competition is going to be competing for, very, very, very marginal improvements
Right.
against one another. And you think that may cause centralization in the way you just described?
Yeah, centralization not in the sense where the miners are going to be able to take over the network, just centralization in the sense that each miner has to have their own all-encompassing vertically integrated operation to
Right.
absolutely squash those costs to as close to zero as possible.
Yeah.
Because basically, as soon as one of them does that, right, that's going to shift the balance of power tremendously. So that's going to cause everybody else to do it. And again, this is we're talking over time. I don't know how long it's going to take for that to happen,
Yeah.
but I do think we're just going to see, people flock to the ends of the world where we have the lowest demand for energy and the cheapest energy resources, and maybe even some innovation. Maybe we'll see fusion. Who knows, right?
Right. You got to think that in a hyper Bitcoinization scenario, that there's just going to be such a tremendous competition for energy that I'm looking forward to the innovation of capturing waste energy, and not just
Mhm.
in the way upstream is doing it with flaring on in oil and gas sites and stuff like that, which is awesome. But even I think it was yesterday I was cooking something in the oven, right? And I took it out and put it on the counter, and obviously there's a lot of heat in the oven after
Right.
you're done cooking, and I just thought like maybe
That's
far
waste
off
heat.
into the like maybe there's an apparatus that is somehow aggregating waste heat energy in our homes, and
Right.
because the value of Bitcoin is so much and that energy is effectively free, will the like will there be there must be innovative ways, or there's going to be, to the hunt for energy, basically the hunt for
Yeah.
free or waste energy, I think is going to be tremendous, and I think that benefits pretty much all parties concerned.
That could be very interesting. Yeah, and that could maybe lead to even the opposite scenario of what I described, and this like extreme
Right.
decentralization, right? Where maybe we have like Bitcoin miners in light bulbs. So you screw in a light bulb, every home's got one, and like
That's what I'm saying.
it just does things with all the little waste that you have in the house, right? That could happen for sure. I mean, it could be interesting. And I think it's cool to see some of the mining improvements we have on the horizon, like better hash, where we're going to let miners have more control over what they're mining, and that reduces their reliance on mining pools and stuff like that. So we could see, we could potentially see that happen. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but I mean, my gut says that the vertical integration happens first, or at least just because that seems to be the easiest path with the technology we have today. But it's also really hard to see where exponential trends lead, especially if the price goes, sky high. Then that could definitely shift the balance.
All bets are off. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that again I heard somewhere is, and proof of work and the mining process in Bitcoin. There's really a lot of interesting things are being written about it, and just providing so much fodder for your mind to just go in a bunch of different directions about the impact or the significance of this innovation, even beyond the role it plays in the current Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think this is from the book where you said, here's where the real world starts to touch our digital world. And I think that
Mhm.
you were referencing POW in some capacity. Can you know elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Bitcoin and proof of work in general is that it allows us to capture real world resource usage in a digital system, right? In a way that's basically not possible to cheat. And so we're burning electricity, right? When we burn that electricity, we're playing a lottery, and then we present the results of this lottery to everybody else on the system. So what we're showing them is that we've burned a certain amount of electricity, or rather, what we're showing them is that we've done a certain number of computations to achieve a statistically improbable result, right? So what Bitcoin mining is, it's like you're throwing this random die and you're trying to get a random number out of it, and that number, every time you throw that die, you burn a little bit of energy, and the target you're trying to hit is this like you have this really giant number line, right? The number of possibilities possible from this mining process is like from zero to almost the number of, or about the number of atoms in the universe, and you're trying to show people that you've hit this really, really small window, the statistically improbable window. And the way that you do that is by showing them a number. And you say, look, this is the number I generated. And in order to generate a number that's so statistically improbable, I must have burned this amount of energy. And that allows us to take real world resources and represent them in a digital format and say, look, this is what I did. You can trust that I did this work because this result would just be statistically infeasible to achieve without having done all that amount of work.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy. I mean, uh, it's it really unlocks this idea that we can have digital scarcity because prior to Bitcoin, I mean, if you had a music file or a photo or a video or something digital, you could just send it to as many people as you want. But with Bitcoin, the thing that you're sending is really scarce. It's truly scarce because real world resources had to have been burned to produce it.
Mhm.
So you can't just produce an infinite amount of it. And the other thing that keeps that in check is that the rules of Bitcoin themselves. So as soon as you're producing some Bitcoins, you're showing people this magical number you generated, but everybody else gets to validate whether the rules of the system have been followed or not. And those rules include things like there's only supposed to be 21 million of them, and when we issue Bitcoins, it has to be on a specific schedule. So like right now, each block you mine, which means every time you win the lottery, you get to give yourself 12 and a half Bitcoins. If you give yourself more, that will be rejected by everybody. So you can't cheat the system in that way.
Yeah.
We're enforcing that you have to have burned a certain amount of or done a certain amount of work, which equates to some approximate amount of energy, and then that cost has produced you this certain amount of Bitcoin.
Yeah. There's so many philosophical implications of Bitcoin and its various attributes and what they ultimately mean. But when you were just saying that, it made me think of, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm still grappling with this, and I get caught up in or caught down in different rabbit holes as a result. But
Mm-hmm.
if it is true that Bitcoin has introduced digital scarcity for the first time, and I think most of us through the process that you just described would say that that is the case, it's also in doing so, and in the way that its monetary schedule was set out, has introduced the idea of infinite scarcity to the human mind, possibly for the first time, with the exception maybe of time. Have you given much thought to that?
Yeah, I think it was Misir Mahmudov who came out with this really awesome article about how Bitcoin and time are the only scarce things, and so why would you trade your scarce time for a non-scarce resource like fiat money,
Right.
right? Because one is being constantly inflated, the supply of it's being inflated, each unit's become less and less valuable, whereas with time, it's finite, right? The amount of time we have on this earth is finite. And I agree, as humans, we have a hard time understanding finite resources, even time, right? I was actually just watching this TED talk about procrastination because I'm a terrible procrastinator. And I'm preparing for a talk. I have to do at a conference in 2 weeks, and I have barely even started. So it's like that. We don't value our time as much as we should. A lot of
Right.
us, people with procrastination problems, will just waste it, right? And the same thing with our money. When we have fiat money, we a lot of times will waste it on various junk. Like we see something shiny and we buy it, especially us who are in first world countries and of means or whatever. But um, Bitcoin introduces a different kind of scarcity to us, and it does start to shift that perception of what is valuable. And like, there's only this amount of time, there's only this amount of Bitcoin. You have to be really wise with how you spend both of those things, because once they're gone, they're gone. It's very hard to get more,
Yeah.
and it's going to become more harder and harder, right? As the new Bitcoins are reducing in flow over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I mean, the scarcity of time is not really in your face, right? It's kind of abstract. And I mean, and
Mhm.
even something as simple as, doing things that are, we kind of all act as though we're going to live forever, even though we all know 100% that we won't, right? Like whether it's
Right.
being reckless with certain activities when we're younger, or unhealthy diets, or smoking, or whatever, we kind of just, we don't believe it's going to affect our amount of time that we have until it does, and then we think,
Hmm.
oh shit, and then it's over. And
Yeah.
Bitcoin, for the first time, perhaps, is externalizing infinite scarcity in a manner that we can actually behold. It's actually something that we can have.
Yeah.
It's an
And I
asset.
think when you see those curves, I think it's been famously said that humans just are horrible at understanding exponential curves. We don't see exponential effects until they like start to happen like that.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's the same thing with time. I feel like as I'm getting older, it used to be where I remembered what I did from day to day, and now it's like week to week, turning into month to month. And it's like months are flying by so fast. Like, I have kids now. Once you have kids, you just now it's time is measured in years. It's like, okay, how did that happen? How did my kid just turn 5 all of a sudden?
Yeah.
So you just have this compression where the time usage feels like it's becoming exponential, right? Because you're just compressing all this experience, and it's the same with Bitcoin, where everybody's like slowly piling into it, slowly understanding it or whatever, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and it's just like exponentially has become a world money. And that moment will not be obvious until it's in retrospect. It will not be obvious that it's happening tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just going to start happening. So yeah, I don't know. It definitely forces you to think. And for me, I started thinking a lot more on longer time scales. And I think about like, well, what does the world look like in 25 years, 50 years, 100 years? What does the world of my children look like? I think some of that is it's really, really hard for the human mind to wrap itself around such concepts and to think on those kind of timescales. And that's also why we see so much criticism of Bitcoin. It's like, well, it's not fast enough. There's not enough merchants adopting it. The Lightning Network's growing like too slowly. And all this criticism is basically people's inability to understand exponential curves because all these curves are exponential, and you're just seeing the beginning of them.
Yeah, yeah. And do you ever give any thought into what will the societal impact will look like on something like this emerging in the consciousness of the world slowly and then
Yeah,
quickly?
definitely. Like my a lot of my angle on Bitcoin is because of I came from the former Soviet Union where we really did have problems with economic censorship and economic control by the government of the entire system. And one of the things that was interesting to me as I got into Bitcoin, I started asking questions that I had never asked before. I asked my parents what happened to our money when we left the Soviet Union, and it turned out that the government allowed us to exchange $100 worth of Soviet rubles for dollars when we left at the government official exchange rate, quote unquote, which is of course not the real street exchange rate, right? So essentially what we got was a very small amount of money. The rest of our money was worth nothing because the street exchange rate for rubles was really, really bad. Nobody wanted them. Just like with bolivars, nobody wants bolivars anymore. So I think about what would have happened if Bitcoin had been around, right? Um, and what if we were just to save 1% of our wealth? Now, but people in the Soviet Union didn't have a lot of savings in general. But
Mm.
what if we could put away 1% of whatever we earned into Bitcoin? And then one day, the Soviet Revolution happens and like the government takes full economic control of the system and like the money devalues like crazy. Well, we have this little stash, right? And we can walk out with a stash. Now, there are challenges of getting out of a system like that, even just like physically leaving the country. But money goes a long way in those situations. It greases certain wheels and allows you to escape with something intact. So if Bitcoin had been around, maybe the very existence of Bitcoin would be enough to prevent the government from even attempting to seize such power because, nobody would everybody would have this escape hatch, right? And they would have this actual money that people valued. So uh, I see that happening today. I see Bitcoin being that new escape hatch. And what I think is going to happen is that not people who are afflicted today, it's not going to be the Venezuelans of today that are going to be able to really escape with Bitcoin, although a few of them have, but it's very few and far between. It's going to be their children, right? It's going to be the children of all those neighboring countries that are now buying Bitcoin. That is going to be the Colombians and all that Argentinians who are looking at what's happening in Venezuela and like starting to develop a little bit of a side savings pot.
Yeah.
Once you have that side savings spot, you now have an exit option. And when you have an exit option, you're also putting a check on the government from doing bad things because ultimately the government can't survive without people funding it. So that funding option starts to go away as more and more people enter into the Bitcoin side stash. And as soon that side stash becomes the main stash. And when it becomes the main stash, then we have a real good check on government spending and government ability to do just preposterous things like they've done in the former Soviet Union or Venezuela.
Yeah. I often think about the young people that are kind of becoming socially conscious today. I don't mean like about the environment. I just mean their kind of brains are activating in the world, whether it's 5 years old, 10 years old, whenever that happens, they start looking outward and comparing it to all previous generations, including my own, and just thinking how exciting it will be for them that when they look out on the world, if they're curious enough to try to educate themselves about how it all works, more or less, um, that this thing will be there for them, And I
Right.
probably talk about this too much, but when that process happened to me, incredibly curious, read everything I could get my hands on, was an Amazon customer from like 2002, and I just, orders and orders of books about everything.
Hmm.
And as a result of that, as much as you feel confidence from, having a certain degree of knowledge and information, I guess, I was disheartened because I realized that the world was, was a lot less rosy than I had thought it was as a kid, and that there was some pretty gargantuan dark forces that were conspiring against freedom, liberty,
Mm-hmm.
blah blah blah, that shtick. But and I think because a lot of those still exist, I think young people today will kind of still confront that. But as they do that education process, now it's inevitable that they'll come across Bitcoin, and I just see Bitcoin as representing such an opportunity to counterbalance all of those things and
Mm-hmm.
potentially even you know over supplant them. And that I feel like the energy and excitement and enthusiasm released from that dynamic
Mm-hmm.
will be awesome.
Yeah, and I think even just the very existence of Bitcoin is an interesting thing because it creates questions in people's heads. It makes them ask questions about money. Why is, one type of money better than another type of money? These are questions that we didn't ask before.
Yeah.
At least, most people outside of maybe like a small percentage of gold bugs who are like, this fiat money isn't real money. But the thing is that most people don't ask those questions. Most people really just go throughout their lives and they use their money regardless of whether they live in America and their money generally works, or in Venezuela where their money generally doesn't work. It's still their money. Like they don't have another option, right? And so once you create this other option, then the questions start to fly. And we've seen this with when Libra came out and they called in the Libra people into Congress. Like Congress is asking questions about the nature of money. That means the American people hopefully are just like a tiny bit more educated and start to ask those same questions as well. And that leads to a lot of interesting discussion because it's like, well, what kind of money do we want? Is it government controlled? Is it like a multinational corporation thing? Or is it money that's truly free of any control by any single entity?
Yeah.
And I think if you put it in that frame, you start to like why would you want any of the first two options? Why wouldn't you want money that is yours and yours alone? Why would you want the government to have their hands on it? Or even worse, like Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know which one of those is worse, but both of those are pretty bad.
Yeah.
Like you don't want this kind of like shadow entity controlling what you can or cannot spend money on. And so I think when people grow up with that, there's gonna be a revolution, right? And so what we're seeing with drugs too. Like we look at cannabis being legalized, half the states are legalized, and if you look back 50 years, you would have not thought that would be possible because the culture wasn't there. But
Yeah.
now it's like it seems absurd that we're not going to get to 100% legalization within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And so that's the culture shift. That's the shift of people recognizing that freedom of choice is important to them. They should be free to do whatever they want with their money, with their body, whatever, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it goes back to that, first slowly,
Yeah.
first slowly,
Yeah.
then
So,
all at once, right? Because
yeah.
as you just said, this Libra thing, which no Bitcoiner takes as a threat or thinks anything of it. It's just it's just another kind of abomination that's emerged, and it may have its a short day in the sun, or maybe an on ramp, or it may actually be a good part of the ecosystem. Who knows? But at least right now, it's actually bringing these concepts and more importantly these questions into the public sphere, the
Hmm.
public lexicon. So like and the the political apparatus that's asking all these questions and trying to keep it in check are having to show their hand. They're having to admit that control of currency is both a geopolitical and a domestic and all sorts
Hmm.
of a means of a lever of power. And
Yeah, I love that. I mean,
they didn't have to admit
that
that before.
that thing that Sherman
Yeah.
said, it was like this threatens our like ability to control the prices of oil and U.S. dollars and all that kind of stuff. It was like, and then he tried to say that we need to ban ownership of Bitcoin. Of course, he stumbled. He was like, I mean ownership. I mean purchasing of Bitcoin. Like that kind of stuff. It starts to show the cracks in the system. It starts to show people that if they're paying attention, that the system that we found ourselves in is not one of liberty, right? America is supposed to be the land of liberty, and we've lost a lot of the liberty, especially in the last 20 years, like 9/11 and everything. We've given up a lot of stuff, and we've given up a lot of it voluntarily, and a lot of what we give up, like as we move to digital payments, right, which is happening, right? Like how many people who carry coins or paper money anymore is
Mm-hmm.
practically being eradicated, and so we're going to move to these systems voluntarily, even if Facebook launches or doesn't launch, I don't know. But there's plenty of digital payment systems already that people start to use. Apple Pay comes to mind, or Google Pay, or something like that. Um, Once we move to that world where, like, 95% of payments are digital, we're just giving up a lot of our freedom, and we're doing it because it's convenient. We're not being forced into it by anybody.
Yeah.
But that gives the government a real good lever in the name of safety and privacy, and protecting us from terrorism and whatever. They have now a really nice lever to have really exert undue control over what we can or cannot do with our money. And that's not a place we want to be in. We already see examples of that in places like China. It's not a good place to be. And if we want to maintain our liberty, it's vital that we maintain freedom of money, because that's, in my opinion, more important than freedom of speech, because that is the thing that buys you the speech, right? Like, in my mind, like, I always vote with my dollars, right? If I want a particular, like, I want to have more organic food, I go and buy organic food. I don't, like, lobby my congressman for more, like,
Right.
to like fund organic, I don't know, ventures or something like that. Like, that's silly. I'm just gonna go and buy it. I'm gonna encourage, my local farm. I'm gonna buy stuff from my local farm and encourage them to expand, right? And if I don't have that freedom of money, then what do I have?
Yeah.
I have no influence on the life around me.
Absolutely. And additionally to that, this is something that I always, I get stuck in the weeds with people when I have this conversation. Is we're in society so much today. We've become so used to the government controlling so many aspects of our lives that we outsource so many of our responsibilities to them. So let's take this example. Most people today would say, even if they don't subscribe to the climate change narrative, hook, line, and sinker, most people would say, yeah, probably best to protect this world, right? Let's stop cutting down the Amazon as much, less plastic in the oceans, blah, blah, blah. Most people would get on board with that.
Hmm.
And their way of bringing that about is lobbying their government, saying you need to sign this protocol, you need to put in place carbon taxes, you need to do this and that, rather than them changing the behavior that contributes to that. Because if they still
Hmm.
demand the services that cause that environmental damage, while simultaneously lobbying their government to enact things that will limit that stuff, then they're literally asking to be prevented from behavior that they willfully and
That's
want
fair.
to
That's
to
fair.
to act in. So I agree with you that the only voting really is with dollars. That money
Yeah.
talks and bullshit walks, right? And
Exactly.
and I think that's the only way to do it. And so whatever your cause is, you've got to put your skin in the game, and you've got to realize that en masse, if people make the change, then you'll see the change you want. But if
Yeah.
not, you're just asking other people to basically oppress you to get some sort of ideological end that's in your mind.
Yeah, freedom of money is super important, and I think it's something we should fight for actively, and that's why I Bitcoin. It's really that's the thing that drives me at the end of the day, because when I started working on Bitcoin, I decided, like, what is the most important thing I could be working on, right? I have a lot of technology experience. I could work on any kind of technology thing, but Bitcoin is that thing. Bitcoin is the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on the world. If we can make it succeed, it's going to change a lot of lives. It's going to make the world a better place, in my opinion. And nothing's perfect, right? I mean, Bitcoin is not a perfect solution to all of the world's problems, but it's in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the direction is freedom, right? Like, if people are free to do what they want to do, then that leads to generally, better outcomes. Um, so that's what we want to have, right? We don't want to have money where we have to ask for permission, and we want to create black markets, because that's ultimately, every time that people try to put bans on stuff, they just create black markets, and those black markets are ultimately worse, right? There's violence, and there's
Right.
shady stuff going on, and that's what happened with drugs. What did they do with the war on drugs? They just created all this violence. Now we have all this migration because of that violence that we created because of the fucking war on drugs, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, why?
And put
Just
innocent
save
people in
yourself
jail and spent a bunch of
innocent
money and
people in
yeah.
jail. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasted tons of taxpayer money. So, like, that stuff is, to me, if we have the freedom money, that it gives us that real optionality. If we don't like this country, we don't agree with what they're doing, then we walk.
Yeah.
And like being a Russian and a Jew, my history, like my people have walked many times,
All right.
and I have personally walked in 1989, right? Like you have to have the optionality of walking. If you don't have that, you don't have freedom, and that's
Right.
what Bitcoin is.
Couldn't agree more. And this is coming up a lot lately too. But Bitcoin is kind of the focal point of that sovereign individual movement. And part of being sovereign is ultimately not being dependent, right? You have to, and obviously financially is one of the primary methods of doing that. But as you just said, if the environment and the landscape politically that you're in becomes such that for whatever reason you don't think it's serving you or it's causing concern, then you have to have the ability to walk, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And like you said, otherwise it's some form of oppression or servitude, unfortunately, as uncomfortable as that sounds.
indeed, indeed.
Um, and also I echo your sentiment where you say like you just you were deciding what you wanted to be involved in, and you were like, there's nothing seems more meaningful than this,
Right.
and I'm in the same boat, and I think a lot of people are now, and everyone's just trying to kind of determine like, okay, nothing seems more meaningful than this. I spend all my time thinking about it. I want to contribute to this because I want, because I know what it means.
Right.
Uh, but how, right? How can I use my unique talents or what I bring to the table and contribute it in that capacity? And
Yeah, it's
that's great.
interesting because I was like when I originally left my job, I was the CTO at Reverb, which was a very fast growing music company. It just got acquired by Etsy actually. So super proud of my team there. But it was an amazing place. I helped start it, and I was there from the beginning, and I watched it grow from 0 people or 2 people to like 150 people. It was crazy. But at the end of the day, I said, okay, well, I need to go and do Bitcoin full time because it's just eating my brain like from the inside out. I just can't focus on work anymore because I'm just thinking about Bitcoin all the time.
Dude,
But the thing that I thought, because my background was in technology, I actually originally thought I was just going to go and like figure out, I'm going to work on Bitcoin Core, or maybe I'll work on Lightning Network and work on the technical stuff. And I've done some peripheral side projects and things, but I actually found that like when looking at the space, there's plenty of developers and they're all really, really smart. A lot of them, I'm getting old in developer years at this point where I feel like I can't compete with some of these young people. But I really just thought we need more education. There's good education out there, but the best thing we can be doing in terms of Bitcoin adoption is helping people understand what it was, and that's kind of why I got into the book. It was almost accidentally because I didn't think that wasn't my thought when I started working on Bitcoin.
sure.
Um, and I think for a lot of people, it's like that, where they just start out like I'm really interested in Bitcoin. I don't know what I'm going to do, and then they start a podcast, or they start a website, or they write a book, or they start writing articles, or they're on Twitter. But a lot of that's just education, right? At the end of the day, we're just trying to help the masses understand this new phenomenon, and hopefully see it from some of the same angles that we see it. And there are so many angles that I think every individual's contribution in this space is really, really valuable because I mean, every day I open up Twitter and read some kind of like new article that somebody wrote that is just brilliant, and it's just a totally new way of looking at Bitcoin, whether it's as a biological organism or as a self-evolving like AI system that's enslaving humanity or something. I mean, there's so many ways to look at it.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that everybody can contribute on that front, and there's no shortage of angles to it.
I totally agree. So my recommendation to people listening, would be don't wait to see it. Like if you have that conviction and you feel like you want to dive in, and the road will probably appear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like you just said, all these great articles. I'm speaking with Brandon Quidham, who did the
Oh yeah.
article about relating Bitcoin and to
Yeah. The
mycelium.
mycelium.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
and
love that one.
yeah, phenomenal. And that's the kind of stuff like an article like that pops up, and you may not have been looking at it in that way, but it really really fits, and then that opens up a whole nother kind of bubble of thoughts and possibilities and stuff like that. So it's really what we're doing collectively is just extracting possibilities and narratives from this thing based on what it is at core. And some of them will fizzle out and others will become massive, probably industries ultimately. So
Yeah.
It's
I
just
think it's interesting because what we're doing is we're developing these narratives that are almost like a religion, right? Where we're creating all these different tentacles of thought around this concept to organize this huge number of people around this one, like really massive global change, right? Because if you think about the kinds of global changes that have happened, usually they've been by force of religions, right? Like something like Catholicism that can spread all over the world and like create this massive change, right? And usually it's done by like people with insane convictions and a lot of violence. And I think we're trying to have this really nonviolent revolution, but we still need that cohesive narrative to tie everybody together and put everybody on the same page. Except for the interesting thing is, unlike religions, which have tended to be very top down, you have like the clerics that come up with a narrative, and then that narrative spreads to the people, right? Like here, we just see like everybody's a cleric, right? Like anybody can come up with this new narrative, and it
yeah,
starts this little wildfire, and it creates this narrative, and it spins out of control, and everybody gets on board with it, and everybody like builds out stuff in that area. So we're seeing Bitcoin spread, in my opinion, very much like a religion, where people are starting to get various pockets of and like sects of Bitcoinism, whether you're an economic Bitcoiner or a technical Bitcoiner
yeah,
or somebody who's just like just thinks that it's like going to change the world entirely. We don't know what the real reality will be, but these narratives help us drive forward, right? They
yeah,
create cohesion and they bring people together, which is really cool. And
exactly.
like the fiat community doesn't have that. The U.S. dollar community does not have somebody
No.
spinning U.S. dollar. Well, actually, they do have somebody spinning U.S. dollar narratives. That's called the mainstream media, I guess.
Yeah.
But
But they don't have the
but
zealots. They don't have the
they don't have the
zealots like
zealots,
we do.
right?
Well, that being said, man, like what is your next trick? You know, so you got the book. It's about a year old. What's the most exciting thing that you're working on?
Well, yeah. So first of all, I'm doing translations, which is a lot of work. I have a lot of people approaching me, so I have like I just got a Spanish translation out. I have a French one in the works. I have a Russian one in the works. Maybe Turkish. There's like a whole bunch of people are just approaching me with random languages that I'm like, this is amazing. You want to do it? Great. So I'm managing some of that, but really I want to do more educational stuff. So one of my next things is to build a site called Bitcoin Answers. I have the domain bitcoinanswers.org. I'm super behind in actually doing something with it, but I'd like it to be a really, really short form Q&A type of thing where there's a lot of good Bitcoin content out there, but I see people, when people are like, how do I get started with Bitcoin? Everybody passes around like Jameson Lop's page, which is a good page, but it's just so much content.
So
It's
dense.
just,
Yeah.
it's not for beginners. So and he's restructured it recently, to be fair, to be like a little bit better. But I want to be super concise, super opinionated. Here's how you do things. So I want to get that out because I do think there's a lot of confusion in the air, and there needs to be both an easy like getting started guide as well as like a sort of dispel common FUD narratives, like Bitcoin's going to eat all the energy in the world, or it's for criminals, or whatever the flavor of the day is.
Yeah.
So I want to have sort of that and maybe I'll work on some apps that are peripheral to Bitcoin purchasing. But I think more and more the education stuff's kind of sucking me in, so
Yeah.
I have to follow that path to wherever it leads.
Well, man, double down. You know, you were saying
Yeah,
you got a speaking engagement coming up soon. I
yeah,
really think, Andreas, we all know and have consumed probably all of his stuff. And in the early
yes,
days, he captivated us all. And he's phenomenal orator, knows it, knows Bitcoin inside and out. But he's just one guy, and like you
yeah,
said, that communication happens in so many different ways, on so many different levels, connecting with people of different perspectives. It's such a varied thing, and what I
hmm
like about it, what I'd like to see is more people that have that inclination, that want to speak, talk, educate, to get out there and do talks, and do it to a live audience of 100, 500 people, whatever it is, and of course record it and put it online and
hmm
that whole thing. But like, I really want people, or I think it would be helpful if people saw the emotion and the conviction, not just the
yeah,
this is what Bitcoin is and this is how to start a wallet and this,
yeah.
which is
That's
great
fair.
and necessary and
Yeah,
everything. But like, all of us, I mean, I'm talking to more and more people now, and I couldn't love it more. But everyone is just, once you kind of allow them to open up and express some of that excitement and enthusiasm and
yeah,
conviction and emotion about it, everyone's like, fuck, this is the most exciting thing ever. Like
It is. It really is.
I really want to, all that kind of stuff that we always talk about. And I would love for a mainstream audience of people that think they're thinking they're coming to a talk about some new technology, money stuff, to see
Yeah.
that visceral like expression
Yeah.
from people. I think that would be a real massive boon to getting people to think about this stuff more and then go down the various rabbit holes and resources of how to interact with this stuff. So, I want to see more of that. So if you're going to
Yeah.
be
I
doing
agree
that,
with you.
then great.
Yeah, that's my plan, man. That's my plan for sure. I think yeah, people need to see that this is a movement and not just a technology, like you said. This is not just a bunch of nerds like doing DeFi or something. This is
Right.
like a world-changing thing. We are changing the world here, and it's not going to be simple, and it's going to be like a fight. It's going to be a revolution, and we're going to try to make it as peaceful as possible, kind of as Nick Carter wrote this Peaceful Revolution article recently, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But it is a revolution, and we have to recognize that aspect of it. And that's what part of the excitement for me too. It's like I just sent some of my books down to like Venezuela through some like back channels. Like they're going to be going to Colombia, like they're going to get them into Venezuela. I don't know what's happening down there, but like, you know, that's like a hotbed of that revolution, right? But that revolution is happening everywhere in
Yeah.
the world, just in different degrees. So we need to get stuff. We need to get information to people. We need to get people excited
Need to get in the
and
hearts and minds, like any
hearts
good
and minds. Yeah.
revolution, right?
Yes, sir.
Um, Jan, how are you on time?
I'm good. Can we do a quick pause, a quick break?
Yep, yep.
Okay, cool. Just give me like a few minutes.
Sure. So I'll call you back, yeah?
All right, sounds good. Yeah.
Okay,
There we go. We're
cool.
back.
Yep. Um, I have no idea where we were, but moving on. I think we were talking about Bitcoin. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah,
Something like that.
you're kind of. I asked you what was next, and you said doing translations and the speaking
Yeah,
stuff, and more in the education space.
yeah, I think so. And like I said, maybe working on some apps. But as time permits, it's tough with all this education stuff that's going on.
Right. One of the things I came across uh, in preparation for this chat was you were kind of tempering overly optimistic attitudes on the time frame for adoption.
Hmm.
Do you want and so this is usually a question I ask, or we'll touch on it in the rapid fire portion. But do you want to just kind of elaborate on because all of us, hyper bulls, we see this happening at the turn of the next bull run or something like that. But
Right.
why don't you give me your 2 cents on adoption?
Yeah. My feeling is when we talk about adoption, we have to like look at the population that we're targeting, right? Um, for example, my parents, people in their 60s, probably not gonna by and large adopt Bitcoin. It's just way too foreign for them, right? So we're excluding large portions of the population with Bitcoin in its current form. I think there are problems there that require people to be comfortable with what it is, and like we talked about, kids that are born with Bitcoin today, they're not going to have to read books about it. That's just going to be their money. So those are not the people that we're targeting with this quote unquote hyper Bitcoinization. If people are saying that within the next 4 years we're going to hit $1 million and Bitcoin will obliterate all value in the world and replace all money. Well, how does that actually physically happen? It doesn't happen unless everybody has some Bitcoin in their hands. Otherwise, it's not actually a good um, worldwide money. Now, there are ways that Bitcoin could get adopted, I think, in small ways. Like it could be that only 1% of the world, like maybe just the wealthiest and most educated people of the world, get their hands on some Bitcoin, and that in and of itself, drives the price really, really high. But is that really adoption? I would argue no. I would say that we haven't really achieved our goal there. So I think in order for adoption to happen, there needs to be a culture shift around what money is and a comfort with this new technology and an improvement in the technology itself to the point where it becomes a bit more invisible. And we're seeing a lot of this happen rapidly. I mean, we're seeing new types of apps come out for key management that make a lot of that like really abstract and transparent. We're seeing improvements in the Lightning Network, which just really was born very recently. So my question is, if we talk about hyper-Bitcoinization within 4 years, how does that all happen without the Lightning Network being where it needs to be, without the user experience being where it needs to be, and without people being comfortable with the money on a visceral level, which is a cultural thing. So for me, I really do think it's a generational shift. I think it's going to be the kids that are growing up today, maybe people born within the last 5 years. I'm not sure where we want to delineate the start of the Bitcoin generation, but people who are born with Bitcoin as normal, and honestly, it may not even be the people born. Like my daughter's 5 years old, but she still knows money. She knows money in three forms now. She knows paper money, she knows credit cards, and she knows Apple Watch. And she intuitively understands that all of this is money. She's like, well, we have to pay for it. Mom does this with her watch, and then magic happens, right?
Yeah.
Um, she has three forms of money that she's familiar with. Coins, she's less familiar with. Like she's seen a few coins, but we almost never use them.
Hmm.
So coins, I think within her lifetime go away for sure because of inflation and they become less relevant. Paper money probably goes away during the next generation, right? It's still in wide circulation, but as we adopt digital forms of payment, that starts to go away more and more and more. So for me, that has to all happen simultaneously as Bitcoin improves along the vectors of usability, scalability, which is to say, Lightning Network and things like that. Those, and then culturally, right? So for me, that is, I believe, a 25-year horizon. So that's how I think about it. Now that's not talking about price though, right? So the price could go to the moon and back in that time. I don't know.
Hmm.
Like I said, it could do that just because 1 to 5% of the world, of the wealthiest people in the world, everybody puts 10 grand into it, and that could like skyrocket the price, but wouldn't be, I would say, it wouldn't be meaningful adoption.
Yeah.
So that's why I think about it that way.
And the other thing is probably that this thing will be in flux forever, right? Even with the internet, yes, we can say objectively that there's widespread adoption now, but it's not like we put the stake in the sand and say we made it. We're here. It's like we're always trying to push the bounds of the innovation. Now in 10 years from now, we may look back at the internet, and the Internet of Things may be far more developed, and our toaster will be online, and our all that kind of stuff. And we'll say, "Wow, you guys lived in a world where only your computer and your phones were online. That's crazy."
Right, it's funny. I just looked that up since you said about the internet, but right now in the U.S., it's 90% of U.S. adults that are on the internet.
Right.
So even in 2019, it's still not 100%.
Yeah.
Um, but 90 is pretty damn high, right? If we get to 90% Bitcoin adoption, I would argue like we're done. We're like we've adopted, right?
And
We,
and you know what's
I mean, I don't
funny?
know what the number is, but
You know what's funny about this kind of stuff is like all of us bulls may hope there's some day where like the mainstream or the incumbent system capitulates, like, all right, you win. But like that's never it's never things don't ever happen that way, right? I mean, just look.
yeah,
This isn't a perfect comparison, but look at how it's insane that we have the almost the entirety of the world's knowledge and connectivity in our pocket on a day-to-day basis now, right? Like 10,
yeah,
even just 10 years ago, that would be a superpower, let alone 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. I mean, you don't need to remember things anymore. I mean, that's
right.
that's that's where we're at, and it's just kind of like, yeah, cool. Some phone
That's
like
normal.
that's
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 normal.
there, and most people don't take advantage of it. In as many ways as they could, and I'm sure it'll be the same with Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
just
again, I think it's and with technology, it's the same thing. Like the technology really shifts with cultural shifts, right? Like Facebook was born because of Mark Zuckerberg, a kid, not because some 60-year-old person came up with Facebook, right?
right.
Like all these apps that are being popular that are popular with kids are built by kids, by and large. It's the kids of the next generation that figure out the new culture that works for their generation. They build the apps of that generation, right?
Yeah.
So some of it is just stuff that won't happen until there's been enough people living with Bitcoin as normal to then come up with the next phase of what Bitcoin adoption looks like. And that's why I don't think it happens that quickly, because it's just that our generation is not going to be the one that figures out all those things. We're going to figure out a lot of it. We're going to build out of the infrastructure, just like the people who are 60 years old now were a lot of the people who built out early internet infrastructure, and they built out the protocols that powered the internet, but they never imagined Snapchat, right? Like that's a weird foreign idea to somebody who's 60 years old. So I think it requires really it's a culture shift that happens through simply the passage of time and new people being born into new technology. Um, a lot of it could get accelerated. I mean, we have AI and a lot of like interesting, 3D printing. There's a lot of movements that could accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin, kind of synergize with it. But I really think that the human mind is just capable of like so much change within a lifetime. So if you're asking somebody who's already lived all their life with a certain type of money to just drop everything and put all their savings into this new thing that's unproven from their perspective, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So it's going to be a generational shift, and it's going to take some time, and that's okay. That's the low time preference, right? We're going to sit, we're going to hang out, and we're going to wait for this to happen, and we're going to push it along in the ways that we can.
Right. So I guess that answers my follow-up, which was if you're right and it takes, you're on the more conservative timeline, will you be happy building a career and, founding, the next 20 years of your work in this space?
I mean, if I was in the 60s and building TCP/IP, I would be like super proud of my work, right? Even though
Right.
I hadn't built anything glamorous, I would say like, you know what? My work, it powers the internet.
Right.
Like, and so that's how I feel about Bitcoin right now. I think, I mean, I could be wrong, of course, but if I'm right about Bitcoin, if we're right about Bitcoin, then being here now and helping it spread is going to be like the early internet pioneers. It didn't build anything particularly glamorous. I mean, multi-sig encryption stuff isn't glamorous. Some of these early, Lightning Network things are super cumbersome. They're not glamorous, but people get excited about some like ridiculous thing like sending around one Satoshi all the way around the world with Lightning Network. I mean, will the people 20 years from now be excited about that? Like, no. But for us, it's a real game changer. Like, we
Yeah.
did this, right? We built this really, really like rough prototype, but it works. And holy shit, it's actually working and it's actually like taking off, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think when you look back on that and you say, I was there in the beginning, I was there helping this thing take shape, it's like really powerful. Even if you didn't build anything that later generations will consider glamorous, they will just know it as the base of everything, right? Like
Right.
that's just the basis of their of their existence is like this new type of money system.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah, I mean that's the other thing I wanted to say was
yeah.
um, I'm not a hyperbole in terms of Bitcoin taking over the entire world. I set a low bar, and if it gets succeeded, then that's great. My low bar is that Bitcoin helps some people in some countries create sort of like a wealth stash that's seizure resistant. If it does that for 5% of humanity, that would be like huge in my opinion. That would be something that really improves the lives of a lot of people. And maybe even as a side effect, kind of game theoretic side effect, puts a check on governments even trying to do silly things. And maybe it has that sort of echo effect in the world. But that's my bar. It's like I want 5% of the people in the world to be able to escape their shitty countries. If we see that happening, then I'll be happy. And if it goes beyond that into something like hyper Bitcoinization and all fiat crumbles, then great. But I don't know. I don't see it happening just yet.
Well, I feel you, man, and I appreciate the pragmatic approach to managing your expectations, so you're not
Yes.
like let down too much.
Like, oh my God, when is hyper Bitcoinization coming? It's not
But I
happening.
am I'm the opposite. I'm like, fuck that. It's all or nothing here. Like I don't, of course that's a noble goal, and everyone should benefit from this thing.
Yeah.
I want the full potential of this thing to be unleashed on the world, and anything less to me is I'm not with it. So that's what I'm striving for.
That's good. I mean, I think we need all of those perspectives because we need different, like, we need the zealots, we need the people really like pushing hard, right?
Yeah,
I feel like my job, being that I came sort of from the mainstream, like, you know what, prior to Bitcoin, I wasn't like a hardcore libertarian. I wasn't into Austrian economics. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff.
yeah,
So for me, I'm like coming, sort of almost as a normie into Bitcoin and saying like, how do we make this palatable to people? Because if I go around shouting rah rah rah
sure,
revolution,
sure,
like people are gonna think I'm crazy. Which, to be fair, people still think I'm crazy for doing the Bitcoin thing,
yeah,
and they're constantly like, "Are you still doing the Bitcoin thing? Like, didn't it go down by a lot?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, that depends on your perspective of
right.
when and how." But yeah, I'm doing the Bitcoin thing because like that's the thing that matters. So yeah, I'm doing it. And so I think bringing sort of a tempered view to people who are not in the Bitcoin inner circle is useful because
Yeah.
the Bitcoin inner circle can seem pretty intense to outsiders. So It's important for us to do both things, to make radicalize the core, but make
Right.
the candy coated shell palatable, right?
Sure, sure. And we've said this a bunch already, but there's all sorts of different people out there that respond to all sorts of different forms of communication and levels of excitement and expectations and ambitions and everything like that. So, you know, and the more people that are into this stuff, the more it can transmute whatever their feelings are about it into some form of communication or expression, and hopefully it finds a home with the right people, So
Yeah, definitely.
and the different means of disseminating information that we have available today, should make that highly, if possible, if not
Yeah,
easy, but definitely possible. So, I guess that's the goal that we're all striving for. Uh,
for sure.
Last question before we break into the rapid fire. But what about Bitcoin today is most exciting to you? Like, what keeps you up at night, or what, when you get lost in a daydream, are you kind of wrestling with? Like, what about this space is the most compelling, interesting to you right now?
I think it's interesting that it's entered into like government consciousness. As we've had the hearings with Libra and everything, I did not expect like the word Bitcoin to be mentioned in Congress within this era of Bitcoin, right? I still kind of thought of it coming in more in 2016 as like a geeky side project prototype thing, and then all of a sudden it's only like 2 3 years later and it's on the floor of Congress being debated. I think it's super exciting from just the geopolitical standpoint of like Bitcoin has entered into conversations that are no longer, it's a geek side project or it's money for criminals or it's something that doesn't matter to something where it's like a really high level discussions about what are we going to do about this thing that's like definitely happening and that we can't really stop. So I like that. From a technical side, I'm really excited about what's happening with the improvements to key management technology, some of the stuff that like Unchained Capital and Casa have been working on with multi-sig. I really think that we need to make the usability of Bitcoin better for normal everyday people.
Hmm.
As I onboard people, if I give them $10 worth of Bitcoin, then that's cool. But once they start getting into larger amounts, there's always questions about like, how do I deal with this? How do I manage this? Should I leave it on an exchange? Should I not leave it on an exchange? Should I get a hardware wallet? There's still a lot of unanswered questions in the space, and I think making that part of it easier is huge. So I'm really excited about the technology that's coming to make that easier for people, just so they don't think about keys as much. It just happens, for them, and we make that just as seamless as possible. And I'm sure some of the innovations there, we're not even really certain of what they're going to look like yet. It's just going to take some time to figure that out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm real excited for. I'm sure you're familiar with Lolly, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
other
yeah,
sort. I mean, I think that one especially because, like you said, I mean, if you're asking someone to make an investment, one, most people aren't investors, and two,
right,
people don't know how to buy, how to store, all this kind of stuff, and services like that have a really kind of cool, accessible, funky brand that provide a service that just makes it.
yeah.
When I spoke with Alex, the CEO, it's like you have a value prop where you can basically say to your potential customers, like, you'd be an idiot not to use our service. We're giving away free Bitcoin, So it's like
Yeah, for sure. I agree with
that's
that.
pretty compelling.
I think their take is really awesome because it does lower the bar for people to get into Bitcoin because they're just earning it for free rather than thinking about how to buy it and store it. And I
They
hope to
don't
see
have to
more
worry about
services.
prices going up or
Yeah,
down. It's they get it for free.
right. If we see more stuff in that vein, that would be cool. Just to have people kind of developing Bitcoin earnings on the side. That was actually one of the reasons originally I got into Bitcoin. I heard this story about some startup in Afghanistan where they were teaching women to code and then helping them earn Bitcoin by
I heard about
coding,
that.
and
Yeah.
so that's a really cool use case because they had a real like oppressive economic financial system where women couldn't even open bank accounts without male supervision. So that's really empowering. It's like you can let people earn Bitcoin. And as again, it's that kind of thing where now with Lightning Network, perhaps people earn Bitcoin that's on Lightning Network right away, so they're already onboarded. So maybe we'll see some of that happening where it's just we're getting more and more people on board without going through the real kind of headache process of buying and storing and all that. Eventually, they're going to have to figure out how to store. So I still think that there's a lot to be done on that front. But at least the buying part can potentially go away as we get more and more earners. So that would be really exciting as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Jan, we're going to break into the rapid fire portion now.
Okay.
I don't know if you've listened to previous shows or you're familiar, but what I'll do is I'll just ask you, the first part is I'll ask you a question and you can answer however long or short as you want, but there's just a number of questions in sequence. And then the last part is a word association where I'll say a word and you just tell me the first thing that pops into your mind.
All right, let's do this.
All right. What is money?
It's a way for us to communicate value. It's a way for us to basically perform some work and then have something that we can, not exchange that work for something right away, but maybe store it for later and then spend it on something later. That's how I see it.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or elderly person, what would you say?
I would say it's a new kind of money that is digital, just like the majority of your dollars today, but it is not under the control of the government. Instead, it's under the control of a bunch of computers. So it's kind of like internet money. And it's not, no one person can really influence how much of that money is created. It's set in stone and it's portable. You can't, nobody can take it from you. You can just kind of squirrel it away for a rainy day.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Uh, because it, I think, has the biggest potential for freeing people from oppressive regimes all over the world. It gives people a way to create a sort of stash on the side of a money that is very difficult for anybody to seize from them. And that in and of itself creates an opportunity for those people to perhaps escape adverse conditions, get out of a country that has a failing economy, an oppressive government, and hopefully over time, that very thing actually puts a check on governments and puts a check on those oppressive regimes from even coming forward in the first place.
What does the sovereign individual mean to you?
I mean, sovereignty to me is about being in control of your own destiny, and having Bitcoin is a big part of that. Having a money that you know is accepted worldwide, that is portable, that is yours alone, and that nobody can take from you, is a huge part of being able to be in charge of your own destiny. You can vote with your money. You can, make moves with your money. You can leave your country with money. Um, that is something that is not possible in the world where we're getting into, which is a fully digital world controlled by governments. You're going to see more and more restrictions on the flows of capital because it becomes so easy. So, the sovereign individual is somebody who is in charge of their own destiny, and you can only do that if you're in charge of your own money.
How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and then purchase it?
I heard about it in 2011, bought the top of the $30 bubble, forgot about it. Heard about it in 2013, bought the top of the $1,000 bubble, forgot about it. Both of those times I sold at the bottom, by the way. So don't worry, don't try to don't try to break into my house and steal the coins that I no longer have. Uh, so I would say from the first time I heard about it was 2011 to the time I actually read about it was 2016. So despite that I had, bought some without understanding it, it took me 5 years to actually start to understand it. And it probably will take me the rest of my life to continue to understand it.
What has been your most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin in conversation or more formally?
It's been, telling them about some of the stuff that's going on in the world, some of the trends we're seeing. For example, China with its almost fully digital payment systems and the amount of surveillance the government has on the payment systems. It's about telling them about inflation in general. I've, for example, given talks at high schools where I've tried to give kids an understanding of inflation by showing them a candy bar from the 50s, which used to cost 5 cents.
5 cents.
5 cents. Same candy bar today costs $1 to $2. So, you start to ask, like, why did it get more expensive when obviously our manufacturing and everything else has gotten way more efficient with technology? And you start to understand that there's that inflation is a thing. So yeah, some of those narratives around both inflation and surveillance and government control over money have been effective for me.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Whoa. The Matrix probably it's probably the obvious one. Getting red pilled, you kind of just go down and you wake up and you realize like, wow, this whole world I've been living in is
Unplugged.
just yeah, this is not the real world. Like I I've just entered into a whole different like sphere with real money, hard money, money that isn't just like arbitrarily created by some random entities.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Um, I don't believe it can be stopped completely, and the reason is because what I imagine to be the worst attack would be like to make the chain completely unfunctional. So let's say some state takes, all the resources they have, they'll take, billions, trillions of dollars even. They will buy up all of the ASICs, they'll manufacture all the ASICs, they will spend all of this energy of the world just like attacking Bitcoin, right? Making it completely unusable. Because remember, attacking Bitcoin, all you can do is really starve the chain from moving forward or something like that, basically making it unusable. Well, what happens in that scenario? They can sustain that attack for some amount of time, but first of all, they're fighting against the entirety of the rest of the world, which can build up hash power in that time. But even if they do, we can always fork the system and create a new one that makes their ASICs useless, and it'll be like a phoenix rising, right? Bitcoin will come back. It will come back maybe in a slightly different form. And because of that, why would they even go through all of that rigmarole of attacking it in the first place? Because they know that they can't really kill it. All they can do is cripple it temporarily. Um, all they're doing is spending a lot of resources on that. So I don't think it's stoppable in that way. Even if we were to find some flaw in the cryptography, let's say that the digital signature algorithm was broken and we were able to, reveal any private key. Well, again, we could just fork the system and start fresh. And the idea of Bitcoin is not going away. There's just no way to kill that. It's coming back, baby. Hydra.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin?
Um, oh, I don't know. 'Cause I've been writing on Bitcoin for such a while. I feel like I understand it relatively well. But I think the reading about the multi-sig developments and how vault technology works and with time locks and multi-sig and stuff that they're developing to make Bitcoin more secure for storage was really cool, because I'm learning that Bitcoin isn't just, on the surface you think of Bitcoin as a system for storing money and sending it around and stuff, but there's a lot more to the programmable aspects of it, and the conditions we can make around spending, around passing that money down to, let's say, our kids and locking it for 18 years. I mean, there's stuff like that we could be doing that's really cool. So I think that would be one of them.
What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
I think it will be to give people, like I said, an option to escape a broken economic system, and that is a huge impact on the structure of society. Because if governments can't really finance their expansion with people paying taxes and stuff like that, and people are fleeing their country, then that's going to be a problem. And I also see that Bitcoin puts a check on government spending in general, as governments do more and more sort of bad stuff. Let's say they're printing money to finance wars, and their people are now going and storing that money in Bitcoin. Well, that's reducing the government's ability to actually spend on wars. And so hopefully I see it bringing about more peace and more equitable conditions for people in the world as they flee bad governments and those governments crumble to be replaced by Bitcoiner governments.
All right, nice.
or,
When
or no government at all, right? If you want to be really hard. uh,
we'll see. When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves? And add on, will they exist in 20 years?
um, I do think central banks will continue to exist because I don't think the fiat system is going away anytime soon, at least not in our lifetimes. But of course, this is complete speculation, so I don't know.
Hmm.
I think that Bitcoin is going to start out as a sort of side thing like gold, where people are storing some of their wealth in it. There's $7 or $8 trillion worth of gold out there, and that's some decent portion of the world's monetary base, but it's not meaningful, really. So we could see Bitcoin take that role for the next 25 years, maybe even 50 years. And that would be pretty big for Bitcoin, but pretty small for the world. And fiat banks could continue to exist. Do I see them adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets? Possibly. I mean, we've already seen Jay Powell come out and say that he sees Bitcoin as a sort of digital gold, digital
Crazy.
speculative store of value. Like, who would have thought 5 years ago that we'd see central bankers saying that, right?
The head of the
Um,
Fed,
so
no less.
yeah, and again, it's a generational shift for me. It's maybe not the guys who are 50 and 60 years old running these banks. Maybe it's the 20 and 30-year-old current people who are going to be the chairman of the Fed, 25 years from now, those are the people who are going to know Bitcoin as normal, and they may well add them to the balance sheets.
What is the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Selling at $2, buying at 30 and selling at 2. That was the worst mistake of my life, literally. The worst. Don't do that ever again. Why would you sell the bottom? Like, of course, I didn't know the first thing about trading or market cycles or what any of this was. I was just like, I bought something, $30 and went down to 2, so it's dead.
Must be worthless.
Uh, that was the worst mistake of my life for sure. But you know what? I wouldn't have done if I had become rich off of Bitcoin at that point. I wouldn't have gone on to do like Reverb, and I had a great time there. And my life would be very different probably. And I'm not sure if it would be for the better. It'd just be different. So
Yeah, man.
I'm fine with the way things turned out.
Yeah, we're all going to do things that are going to cause us to look back and wish, in Bitcoin especially, that we had done things differently. But you get stuck in a negative loop if you do that. So you got to just go forward.
Exactly.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
I think it's absolutely critical that he is anonymous, or at least it was critical for the creation of Bitcoin. I think that Satoshi being anonymous also adds a little bit of an air of mystery to the whole thing, which gives it some of that sort of mythical religious aspect, which I think is important for a shift to take hold. Is it going to be important if Satoshi, say, comes back tomorrow? I don't think so as much, because I think the system is sufficiently decentralized where that won't really matter. I think the worst that could happen is, let's say Satoshi comes tomorrow and decides to market sell all of his coins or her coins. Well, what's that going to do? It'll depress the price for a bit, but again, just like the phoenix rising from the ashes, once those coins are well distributed, then game on,
Yep. At what price would you permanently sell over 75% of the Bitcoin you hold, assuming there is no necessity to do so?
Wait, assuming there's no one, just like for fun, just to capture the gains?
Yeah.
I'd probably sell a little bit if it hit like 100K.
75%.
Oh, I have to sell 75%? Yeah, I could sell 75% at 100K. I mean, I don't know. It's like if it hit 100K, I feel like we have decent worldwide adoption, and at that point, I would have a fair amount of coins. I could have those be in somebody else's hands. I don't want to be greedy. I have enough money. It'll be fine.
How far away from 100K do you think we are?
I'm gonna go with a conservative 4 years.
Okay. All right. That's crazy that that's conservative, but I know what you mean.
I mean, there's people who think it's gonna happen like at the next halving.
Yeah.
So.
What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
I have learned that I'm a horrible spender, which I knew before, but I think with Bitcoin and like affecting my thinking in a more low time preference way, I've at least started to contemplate like maybe I should delay the purchasing of this thing for some time, and just see if my money appreciates in value, both Bitcoin and fiat, right? Because I have fiat and interest bearing accounts, so it's like spend it today or spend it tomorrow, right? If you spend it tomorrow, you have more money to spend potentially, unless of course the prices of the thing you're spending it on go up. but but yeah, I think it's influenced my thinking in terms of thinking about interest rates and thinking about time preference a bit more in my day-to-day life.
Have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
I have purchased other coins. I'm not going to be coy about that, especially as I was getting into the ecosystem in like 2016, and then it was like the height of the Ethereum, rager and whatever. So yes, I have purchased other coins. I will not purchase other coins again. I will make one exception, which is I do think, like if we consider security tokens coins, which are basically just a form of stock, if it happens that a company start issuing stock that way, I could see that happening, but I don't know that will ever happen like in mass, but it does appear to be a thing at the moment. So I don't know. But again, that would just be stock. It's not like a crypto money or anything like that.
Yeah. What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion, if none on Bitcoin, any subject fair game?
Well, my contrarian view on Bitcoin is that it's going to take, several generations for adoption. I think that's pretty contrarian to most Bitcoiners that think it's happening tomorrow.
The hyper bulls
So
are coming for you, man.
yeah, I see. I am hyper bullish, but just on a really long time scale. I'm like
Right.
100 years hyper bull, 10 years mildly bullish to neutral, because I think again that there has to be a culture shift. So I would say that's my contrarian view, and also that we're just not there with technology. We need to really improve the onboarding experience and everything for that to happen.
Yeah. You just kind of answered this, but ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know, 100K ish. I would say it doesn't seem crazy, but I don't know.
Do you believe there are any reliable ways at spotting a paradigm shift? If so, what are they?
Oh, that's good. Well, I've lived through many paradigm shifts in my lifetime. I've been very lucky. I saw the internet, well, the web basically be born. I immigrated to the United States in 1989. 1993 or 92 is usually the considered the birth of the web. I saw that happen. I knew it. I mean, I knew it in my bones as a kid. I saw it. Actually, the first thing I saw was BBSs when people were like chatting online, these phone systems. I knew it in my bones that that was the thing. I knew that was happening. And I think the way you see these shifts is part of it's intuition. I don't know. I think some people see them, some people don't. Part of it's just being around technology and recognizing that technology develops exponentially. And when you see technology that's coupled with a culture shift, that's the most powerful thing of all, right? And that's how we get the real paradigm shifts. So I would argue that the web and online culture was the paradigm shift, right? Like the shifting of human interaction to online forms, not just the web by itself, not just email by itself, but the en masse like migration of people to online forms of media was the culture shift. And when I see Bitcoin, I see that same thing happening, right? I see an en masse kind of conversion of people's perception of what money is to digital money. I see that happening regardless of Bitcoin. I see the digitization of money as a paradigm shift in the world. And then we see that Bitcoin is just the open source version of that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just like we saw with Linux, we saw, the digitization of communication, and then we also saw Linux, the open source version of that, and now we have Android, and it's powered by Linux, right? And like half the servers or more than the servers, most of the servers in the world are powered by Linux. So when you see an open system that captures the paradigm shift of that era come to be, like that's the place to be, and that's what Bitcoin is. It is the place. It's the open source money that we need in this era of digital money.
Do you have a
Ooh.
morning routine? If so, what is it?
I usually exercise in the morning. I do kung fu twice a week, and then on the days that I don't do kung fu, I'll probably garden or do something else that's somewhat physical, because I'm like I'm not really a good morning person. So I get my kids to school. I'm like the stay-at-home dad kind of person now. Not stay-at-home, but I'm in charge of the drop-offs and pickups. So I do that, and then I do some physical activity, and then I like get on my computer and compute.
How do you define success?
For me, it's just about being happy with your everyday life because it's time is short. You got to be happy with the stuff you do day to day. So I feel successful when I'm doing something that's pleasing to me. And where hopefully I'm helping other people. It's kind of like a nice side effect to that. But ultimately, if I'm doing something that's engaging for me, engages my mind and my body and whatever, then I'm happy.
Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
Well, Twitter. Twitter's the place. There are many who's there, but I'll just say some of my favorite people.
Sure.
Oh man, I'm gonna leave people out. I don't know, but I really like pretty much everybody at Unchained Capital is awesome. Like Drew for the technical stuff, Parker Lewis for the economic stuff. I love Stefan Livera podcast. Just the economic angle there is really great for me because I'm more of a technical person, so I love learning more about Austrian economics. I like Peter McCormick's podcast. He asks good questions. Marty Bentz. I like the Tales from the Crypt, just for like kind of the what happened this week format. I really like that. But yeah, Twitter. I'm pretty much on there all day, every day. And if you follow those people, then you'll branch out into other really good people as well.
Yeah, it's just such an insanely efficient way at like info discovery, because it's
Yeah.
soon people publish stuff, they throw it out there, everybody's connected, it gets sent like wildfire through, Bitcoin, Twitter, and everyone's up to date in a matter of a day. It's wild.
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually around at during Twitter's birth. I was doing my own startups, and I saw Twitter be born. It came from another startup called Odeo. A lot of people don't know this, but I signed up for a Twitter account in 2006, which was pretty early. I think it was 6 months. Somebody pointed out to me that my account is only 6 months older than Jack's, and I was like, "That's pretty awesome." Uh, I mean, 6 months, after him.
Yeah, yeah.
But the truth is, I didn't really use Twitter until Bitcoin came around. Like I
Me
was on
neither.
Twitter. I was like, this is kind of interesting. What is this like microblogging thing? And then I was like, a lot of people are posting junk. I don't care about this. Went away for many years and then kind of came back because I realized that that's where Bitcoin happens, or at least a small subset of Bitcoin is happening there. But I would argue that a lot of the sort of to use a horrible word, thought leadership and like philosophy of Bitcoin is happening on Twitter.
Yeah.
So it's worth hanging out there.
Yeah, I was the same way. For me, it was just a self-curated news source for years, and then sometime early second quarter this year, I stumbled upon or happened in Bitcoin Twitter and got completely sucked in.
Yeah, that's great.
What is one action, important action that I or anyone else listening can take to up our game in your area of expertise? So if they want to improve, what's the best way you know how to do so at this point, as it relates to Bitcoin ideally, but if not, anything is fine.
Yeah, for Bitcoin, I would still my go-to is Andreas videos. Watch the Andreas Antonopoulos videos. I have two that I really like to recommend, which spoke to me, but there could be many. One is Currency Wars, and that talks about the shift in the world around the eradication of cash, as well as people basically manipulating their currencies, which is extremely relevant to what's happening today, 2019. He was 3 years early to that game. He pretty much laid out what was going to happen between the U.S. and China. He laid it out in 2016. He said this exact thing was going to happen.
He probably
And
didn't
so
say the president was going to be tweeting that we need to devalue
he,
our currency.
this is true. He did not say the president was going to be tweeting it, but that was 2016. So adjusted for 2019, it was pretty right on.
Right.
Well, we're in a different world now. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other video I really like is Monolith of Immutability, where he really talks about like how immutable, how hard to change Bitcoin is,
Hmm.
which was a real game changer for me when I understood it. And I actually watched all the Andreas videos before I even read the white paper or read any other technical resources. And he did such a good job of explaining it that I felt really at home once I did dive into more of the technical stuff. So still recommend starting there for everybody.
Yep. What is one question you'd like to see added to this list?
um, how about the question of what could you personally be doing to help Bitcoin's adoption?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of the people I'm speaking to are like doing something already, but
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
find a
But
way
like
to make that
maybe
work.
rephrase it in some way.
Yeah. Okay. Word association. I'll say the word. You give me the first thing that pops up.
I'm scared. Okay, go ahead.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Shadow,
Government.
control,
Hash rate.
power,
The individual.
free,
Security.
good,
Ego.
bad,
Greed.
very bad.
Stacking sats.
Um, wealth,
Fiat currency.
paper,
Guns.
violence.
Inventing Bitcoin.
My book.
Altcoins.
Shit coins.
Pizza.
Delicious.
Socialism.
Dangerous.
Family.
Love.
Trump.
Narcissist.
Future.
Optimistic.
Libra.
Beast.
Gold.
Shiny.
Bitcoin.
Strong. I don't know. That was the first word that came to my mind.
Well, that's what it's for.
Orange coin strong. Number go up.
Trademark. Let's get the T-shirt on that.
Yeah.
Jan, that's all I got for you, man. I really appreciate
right.
you taking all this time to speak with me this morning. Really enjoyed your book and really love that you're putting that kind of work out into the space, which hopefully will actually prove you wrong and will foster adoption on a shorter timeline than you articulated here tonight. But the beautiful
Thank
thing
you.
about
Thanks,
all
John.
this is we'll be able to watch it all play out and hopefully
Yeah,
contribute further.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, and like Bitcoin just solves all the world's problems tomorrow. That'd be great. I'm not like I always would love to be wrong. I just like to set the bar low, so I'm not disappointed.
Yeah, fair enough. Are there any destinations, Twitter, website, anything like that you want to throw out?
Yeah, my Twitter is Scoop. That's SKWP. Super strange spelling because it's a name that I chose when I was 14. That's from an Isaac Asimov short story, but SKWP is the name. And then you can find my book on Amazon. It's called Inventing Bitcoin. You can also buy it at inventingbitcoin.com if you want to spend your precious Bitcoin. I will take it off your hands. You can use it there. Use Lightning or Bitcoin, powered by OpenNode, TM, whatever. They're pretty awesome. So, yeah.
Dude, it's fun. It's funny the names that we give our accounts. When we're young, when we're not thinking about it, like when we're doing
Right.
it quickly. In for this show, I started a new Skype account because when I first set up my Skype account, it says, "What would you like to be your username?" And for a reason that I cannot fathom, I typed in Oily Boy, OILYBOI. That's
Oh
what my
God, no.
username was for a decade on Skype. So I thought maybe for
Amazing.
this I should change it. So anyways, the
Amazing.
things we do when we're young. Jan, thanks
Sure.
again for joining me, man. I wish you all the best in the future, and look
Thank you.
forward to
Thank you.
talking to you in 6 to 12 months when whether it's a new book or whether that you just have more to talk about on Bitcoin. Just let me know.
Perfect.
Love to have you back anytime.
Thanks a lot, John. It was a pleasure.
All right, brother. Take care.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.